The cabin was filled with the steady hum of the engines when, without warning, the captain's voice cut off mid-sentence. Passengers looked at each other in confusion, a silence heavier than turbulence settling across the rows. Then, from row 14, a young girl stood up, her eyes locked on the cockpit door. No one expected her to move, no one expected her to speak, and yet in that moment, she became the one person who might change the fate of everyone on board. The Airbus A320 cruised smoothly at 37,000 feet, the seatbelt sign long extinguished. Passengers had settled into the rhythm of the flight, some scrolling on their phones, others lost in books, and a few already dozing with neck pillows propped awkwardly against the windows. The air smelled faintly of reheated coffee and lemon-scented wipes, the typical perfume of long-haul travel. From the cockpit, the captain's voice had been a reassuring presence since takeoff. Every so often, he would break through the white noise of the engines with calm updates: altitude, weather ahead, time to destination. He had the kind of voice that made passengers feel safe, measured, steady, the sound of someone fully in control. In row 14, a teenage girl pressed her forehead against the cool plastic of the window. She was quiet, observant, not one to make herself noticed. To most people on board, she was invisible, just another passenger among the crowd. Her mother sat beside her, absorbed in a crossword puzzle, while across the aisle, a businessman tapped impatiently at his laptop keyboard, eyes flicking to the clock on the screen. Everything felt routine, predictable, normal. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, this time lighter, almost conversational. He spoke about expected turbulence near their descent, joked about the chilly weather awaiting them on the ground. His tone had that casual warmth that made people chuckle quietly, even though they were strangers sitting shoulder to shoulder in silence. Then, as he continued, something odd happened. The words stumbled. Mid-sentence, his voice faltered, as though he'd forgotten what he was about to say. A pause followed, longer than usual, long enough that a few passengers raised their heads from their screens. Then the intercom clicked off. A ripple of unease swept through the cabin, subtle at first. The businessman frowned at the overhead speakers. A child across the aisle tugged at her father's sleeve, whispering, "Why did he stop talking?" The girl in row 14 noticed it too. Something wasn't right. She shifted in her seat, staring toward the front of the plane as if the cockpit door itself could give her answers. Minutes stretched. No announcement. No explanation. Just the steady drone of engines and the rustle of magazines turning. For the first time since takeoff, the cabin felt unusually heavy with silence. Flight attendants moved up and down the aisle, smiles pinned in place but eyes flickering nervously toward the front. They were trained to remain calm, but even their footsteps seemed quicker than before. The girl leaned closer to her mother. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Her mother nodded, still keeping her voice low. "I'm sure it's nothing. Maybe a technical issue with the intercom." But the girl wasn't convinced. She couldn't shake the strange, halting way the captain's words had ended, as though something, or someone, had stopped him mid-sentence. And as the seconds ticked by without another word from the cockpit, that fragile sense of normalcy, the illusion of safety at 37,000 feet, began to unravel. At first, passengers brushed it off. After all, flights were full of small interruptions, an announcement cut short, a bit of turbulence, a flicker in the cabin lights. But the longer the silence stretched, the harder it became to ignore. What should have been a routine pause started to feel like a void, heavy and unsettling, hanging over every row like an unspoken question. The businessman in row 13 finally closed his laptop with a snap. "Strange," he muttered to no one in particular. A woman across the aisle gave him a quick, uneasy smile, the kind people give when they're trying to convince themselves everything is fine. The flight attendants moved with carefully practiced grace, but their eyes betrayed them. They kept exchanging quick glances. Subtle signals passed between them as though they were silently rehearsing what to do next. One of them, a young man with neatly combed hair, disappeared toward the front galley and didn't return. Another lingered longer than usual by the cockpit door, her hand brushing the handle before she quickly stepped away. The girl in row 14 felt her chest tighten. She couldn't explain it, but something deep inside told her this wasn't just a technical glitch. She watched the passengers around her, people shifting in their seats, craning their necks toward the front, whispering in hushed tones. A child asked, "Why isn't the pilot talking anymore?" The mother shushed him gently, her voice trembling just enough for the girl to notice. The questions were spreading, creeping like cracks in glass. Then the intercom clicked again. Every head snapped upward. But this time, there was no voice. Only a faint burst of static, like someone had pressed the button but couldn't, or wouldn't, speak. The sound cut off almost immediately, leaving the silence even louder than before. A murmur swept through the cabin. It wasn't panic yet, but it was close, the thin edge of unease sharpening with every second. People began pressing their call buttons, their overhead lights blinking like stars in a dark sky. The girl's heart thudded against her ribs. She wasn't just scared, she was listening, straining to catch something beyond the hum of the engines. And maybe it was her imagination, but she swore she heard something faint through the door at the front. Not words, not clearly, but movement. A muffled thud, a shift of weight, something that didn't sound right at all. The attendant who had vanished into the galley returned, his smile tighter now, his steps faster. He leaned down to whisper something to his colleague by the cockpit. She nodded once, glanced at the passengers, and forced another smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, everything is fine. Please remain seated." But no one believed her. The silence wasn't just silence anymore. It was the absence of the one voice they all relied on, the captain's. And in that absence, fear was beginning to take root. The girl in row 14 clenched her fists against her knees. She didn't know why, but a thought lodged itself in her mind and refused to let go. Something had happened in the cockpit, and she knew it wasn't over yet. The cabin had shifted from quiet unease to a low hum of voices. Passengers leaned into aisles, whispering, speculating. Some tried to joke, others prayed under their breath. The air felt warmer now, heavy with the weight of tension that refused to break. The girl in row 14 sat very still, her pulse quickening. She was no stranger to fear, but this was different. It wasn't just her own life at stake. Everyone around her seemed frozen in that space between doubt and denial, waiting for someone else to act. But deep down, she felt a truth rising like a tide. If she didn't move, no one would. Her eyes fixed on the cockpit door. The attendants still hovered near it, putting on the kind of smiles that fooled no one. She caught a glimpse of one of their hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the service cart. That tiny detail confirmed what her instincts had already been screaming. Whatever was happening behind that door, the crew didn't have control over it. She swallowed hard. Her mother, still absorbed in the crossword as though clinging to normalcy, reached for her arm. "It's fine," she whispered. "Just stay calm." But calm wasn't what the girl felt. She felt urgency, a pressure building in her chest until sitting still became impossible. She thought of the faint thud she had heard earlier, the sudden cut in the captain's voice. Something was wrong in there. Terribly wrong. Without fully realizing it, she unbuckled her seatbelt. The soft click was loud in her ears, like a spark in silence. Her mother looked up, startled. "What are you doing?" The girl's voice was quiet, but steady. "I need to go." Before her mother could protest, she slid out into the aisle. A few heads turned, curious at first, then confused as she started walking, slow, deliberate steps toward the front of the plane. The murmurs rose. A man in row 12 frowned at her. A woman clutched her child closer. Everyone was wondering the same thing. Why was she moving toward the cockpit? One of the attendants stepped in front of her, blocking the path with a rehearsed smile. "Please return to your seat, miss. Everything is under control." The girl looked up at him, her voice firmer this time. "It's not. You know it's not." The attendant blinked, taken aback. For just a fraction of a second, his mask slipped, and she saw the truth in his eyes. Fear. Helplessness. Passengers were watching now, the hum of whispers rising into anxious questions. What's happening? Is something wrong with the pilot? Why won't they tell us? The girl took a deep breath, her hands trembling but her voice steady. If no one does something, we are all in danger. And in that instant, something shifted. The cabin, once a sea of passive faces, was no longer just an audience. They were witnesses to a moment no one expected, a moment when a teenage girl in row 14 dared to challenge the silence, to step forward where adults had frozen. The attendant hesitated, caught between protocol and the undeniable force of her determination. And as she stood at the threshold of the unknown, every passenger on board leaned into the moment, breath held, waiting to see what would happen next. The captain's voice was gone. The plane was silent. And now, all eyes were on the girl in row 14.